This is the intro. Honestly, I get my swanky new setup ready and everything. You can see all my cool Blu-rays and all that. Just about to sit down and start filming, and then look. It hath been claimed. It hath been claimed by the old bean. Unacceptable. You hear me? I don't care if she's there. She is not going to be sitting on my lap. She is going to be well out of the way for this video. I'm going to be delving slightly outside the usual focus of films for this video, by instead talking about my favourite series of games made by the Japanese developers, FromSoftware. FromSoftware was founded in 1986 by Naotoshi Zin, apologise for any butchering of names, and released its first ever video game for the PlayStation called Kingsfield. While they would go on to have success with the Armored Core franchise, it was the series of games sparked by Kingsfield that would prove to be their most critically and financially acclaimed work. Since 2014, the president of the company has been Hidetaka Miyazaki, the creator of the Dark Souls series. The company skyrocketed throughout the 2010s after the release of Demon Souls, a fantastic game set in a strange land of fog inhabited by demons who are fueled by souls. I get it! Demon Souls, the game was renowned for its massive boss battles, emphasis on exploration, and a frighteningly high level of difficulty. These factors, combined with its distinct tone and atmosphere, cryptic dialogue, and understated narrative, became the essential staples for many of their games going forwards, establishing a formula dubbed Souls-like. From there, we were treated to the oppressive, moody world of the Dark Souls trilogy, the gothic horror and cosmic weirdness of Bloodborne, the stylish cinematic world of Sekiro, and most recently, the gargantuan scale and grandiose of Elden Ring. I love these games tremendously, except for Demon Souls, but that's because I haven't played it, so, sorry. But the Dark Souls series has had an especially big impact on me. I struggle to call myself a true gamer because I'm just so damn picky with what I play. Unless it's a game that is so cinematically driven, it may as well just be a film. But the Dark Souls games, and subsequently the rest of FromSoftware's Souls-likes, broke through that stubbornness and threw me into this incredible, exciting world of challenges and exploration. My true appreciation for these games, however, comes from the world building and storytelling. I find it incredibly fascinating to see how these games convey information about its characters and world, about the history of the lands and its people in such a unique way. With the possible exception of Sekiro, which takes on a more traditional narrative and structure, for the most part. The rest of FromSoftware's games place a huge emphasis on strange, eerie characters who speak in riddles, immersive atmosphere, and telling a story through discovery. Many parts of the Souls games can go unnoticed for many first-time players, as the game is content to let them miss out on entire quest lines or playable areas. There is practically zero hand-holding in those games, taking on the adage set forth by the original Legend of Zelda when Link is told, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." Many of FromSoftware's games since have taken that principle of simplifying a player's introduction to a world and allowing them to run off into the unknown, armed only with a sword and shield. They are games defined by their sense of mystery and for encouraging the players to jump into the deep end. This channel has sort of become a bit of a hotspot for me to talk about unconventional and sometimes experimental filmmaking and storytelling, and trust me, I will absolutely start going into less challenging concepts down the line for my own sanity. That Chicken Little video, that's on the way for sure. But I'm so drawn to new ideas, and I love seeing people explore unconventional and creative ways of storytelling. And that's why I love Dark Souls so much. I mean, I've simply never experienced a world or story in a way that those games have made me experience. In this video, I want to explore and dissect the various techniques used in FromSoftware games to immerse a player into its narrative, and how those techniques could be similarly utilised in filmmaking. How can we take those techniques to make our screenplays and films feel more impactful, distinct, and intriguing? For many fans of the Souls games, the characters are probably the biggest standouts, and I do include the bosses in that statement, as many of them, like Gwyn or Vendrick or Artorias, have so much impact on the world that their presence is more than just some nothing enemy, but I won't be focusing on them as much as the NPCs in this section. Some of the most memorable characters ever put to a video game can be found across FromSoftware's catalogue of games, Whether it's the unbridled optimism and hope that Solaire brings, the inspiring, calculated attitude of Ishanashina, the cutesy innocence of the doll, or the gruesome, revolting nature of the loathsome dung-eater. And there's also Patches, who is in a league of his own, quite frankly. I love that fucking slimy prick. But what makes these characters so beloved? Well, besides some stellar, iconic visual design, many of the NPCs are framed in such a way that entices the player's curiosity. The characters invite intrigue through their visuals and through their voice acting, but also through the way they speak. I mean, it's sort of become a bit of a joke at this point, but there's no denying how colourful and intriguing the NPCs do feel when they start speaking to you in eerie riddles and strange proverbs. All of the strange riddles the characters speak in and their unique designs serve an important purpose in inviting the player's interest as to who they are and what they want. Combine that with the manner and locations in which the players meet them and interact with them, and you have set the stage for a character and potentially a plotline that is exciting and memorable. I've already mentioned him just a moment ago, but there is a reason why Solaire is so beloved and has sort of become the iconic image of Dark Souls. Besides having this beautifully simplistic design with his bucket helmet and smiling sun emblazoned on his chest, creating an instantly recognisable look, he is so unwaveringly optimistic and friendly in his interactions with the player that it makes it very hard to not instantly fall in love with him. He isn't a parody or comically exaggerated in any way, he feels grounded and he fits the tone of the game. But the fact that he is one of the few genuinely friendly faces that you meet in the dark, oppressive and violent world of Lordran makes him such a welcoming character to interact with, meaning his subsequent appearances later on offer a sort of sigh of relief for the player. Then there's characters like Eileen the Crow, who creates impact through being just being a boss-ass bitch, man. She creates this allure of admiration and is looked upon as being a badass due to her cold, ruthless, and uncompromising outlook on the terrifying world of Yharnam. In a place ravaged by wolves and mad mobs, Eileen's direct manner and efficient outlook is looked upon by the player as a valuable asset. Eileen is trustworthy, and as such, she is a helpful ally to have. Despite characters like the aforementioned two, many of the other NPCs in the Souls games are so great because of their secrecy. They exist in games and in worlds where the player is not privy to every piece of information. Much of Bloodborne's success lies with the themes of corruption and higher powers pulling the strings while humanity remains ignorant of the darker truth. So when the game does make its sudden shift in tone halfway through, it wouldn't land as well if the players had learned and been told every piece of backstory from the get-go. Just as much as it's important to show restraint in the information shown about the world, the NPCs have their own agendas, ideologies and goals that are not always known to the player. It is something to be unearthed through progression. We start to learn to not trust everything a character says to us, not just because of how purposefully vague they can be. We start to learn through simple gameplay that our actions have consequences, whether for better and worse, and that the NPCs we meet along the way may just have more control over our actions than we initially thought. Take Yusefka from Bloodborne as example, one of, if not the very first character you meet in the game who isn't some bloodthirsty wolf or some crazy mob member. She's presented as sensitive and empathetic, but she's also hidden behind a door from us. Despite all the right things being said, we are still, somewhat resistant to her due to her hidden nature. I mean, it adds a layer of mystery that offsets her innocent intentions to help her patients. Later on, her mannerisms change and she becomes far less guarded about her clinic and wishes you to venture off and send people to her that she can help them out. Perhaps it's a simple change of attitude towards the plague in Yharnam. Maybe she's now open to welcoming more sick people in because she's figured out some sort of effective treatment. Or maybe she's not at all what she seems anymore, and an imposter has taken her place, one who is willing to manipulate us for her own sick, twisted goals. Perhaps you've even noticed that the voice actor for Yusefka has changed. Yusefka brilliantly captures an arc in regards to players' interactions with her, starting off as someone we learn to trust before our morbid curiosity causes us to dig deeper into true intentions, finally culminating in a shocking revelation and an important choice. One last example I want to mention is Siegward of Katarina from Dark Souls 3. He is, for me at least, the best example of a great character in the Souls games. A character that encapsulates all the necessary tangibles that make the NPCs so memorable and so good. He has a distinct visual design to him to help him stand out, as well as a uniquely bubbly, heartwarming personality to contrast with the rest of the world and its characters. His motives, they start small, as some sort of simple puzzle to challenge the players with, before slowly bringing them into his own journey. All the while, his goal remains unknown to us, but we develop a trust and understanding with him as the game progresses. The more we meet him and the places we meet him in helps us put together a larger picture, a picture that is far more complex than that simple puzzle during our first encounter with him. We can piece together his cryptic phrases alongside the locations he is found in to realise where his journey will end. By the time we reach the final part of his quest, our investment in him is already set, and we can help him finish off his favour to an old friend, leaving us with a satisfying, cathartic, but ultimately melancholic conclusion. He's just a brilliant character, probably one of my all-time favourite characters from the Souls series, and what an amazing story he has. So how can we look at these examples and things that we've discussed regarding characters, and how can we apply it to filmmaking or writing? One important thing we can learn about from FromSoftware characters is that subtext and subtlety is king. It is important to ensure your characters feel fleshed out and interesting, but are never over-delivering on exposition of who they are, where they're from, what they want. Trust the audiences are willing to learn and grow with a character over the course of a story. Additionally, keeping a character's true motivations from the audience is standard practice for plot twists and that. But the best part of a plot twist is being able to lay the groundwork for it. You don't want to throw a curveball for the sake of shock. You want it to feel earned, and the best way to make it feel earned is to sow the seeds of doubt through dialogue and actions so that the audience can piece together their own expectations and theories. There are plenty of films out there that employs a method of character building that relies on audience intrigue, on mystery, on the things that are unsaid, and the need to discover more about a person, such as Enemy's subtle reveals of the two Jake Gyllenhaal characters and their intentions with one another. We learn so much about their differences and motivations just by inferring things about them through very subtle, small dialogue exchanges, or even the smallest of actions. Then there's the entirety of More Than Colour, a film where the titular protagonist engages with and enacts bizarre behaviours that can oftentimes shock or disturb, but all the while it builds your curiosity over the true intentions behind what she does and says. The more you see of her, the more you understand and learn about her motivations. Many of the characters and NPCs in the Souls games can feel like statues sometimes, due to their style of speech or their mysterious nature. And that's something that you might not always want your characters to have or to feel like in a film, especially when there is no player agency and you are instead a different kind of participant to the story. But I think an important thing to take away from the likes of Solaire, Eileen, Sigurd, Yusefka is that oftentimes it is better to have a character defined by their actions as well as by the things they don't say, rather than the stuff that they just blurt out loud. If it's not apparent already, FromSoftware loves employing a show-don't-tell approach to their stories. It can sometimes lead to a frustrating experience for new players, as they are meant to interpret and piece together the story over the course of the game. If you want to learn why you are here and what your purpose is, then you have to actively go out and search for answers, because it's damn certain that no one is willing to give you a straight answer in the game. Arguably, a truly great game will prioritise player agency, and I would argue that the Souls games do a phenomenal job with that by encouraging you to explore, to not be put off by the darkest caves and to instead light up a torch and set forth into the unknown. There's no time to waste on questions or doubts. Those are things that are allowed to naturally develop and to be answered over time. The importance is set on you needing to take the initiative. The first two Dark Souls games are perhaps the best examples of not holding your hand throughout the game. They are far more willing to present the bare bones of the story and to allow the players to put together the rest for themselves. The first game gets about as explicit as you need to ring the bells of awakening and link the first flame, or the second game tells you to find a cure for the undead curse. Neither of those goals give much in the way of further explanation. I mean, there is no needless exposition to bog you down with. You have a simple goal to achieve and you learn about the implications and potential repercussions of those goals as you progress. I mean, Bloodborne for me nails the obtuse and unorthodox style of storytelling perfectly, in my opinion. It's never quite as confusing as Dark Souls can sometimes be to follow, or even Elden Ring for that matter, but it doesn't sacrifice the unorthodox narrative approach that makes those games so special. After a fairly confounding and bizarre cutscene which gives very little information to the player, Bloodborne is kickstarted by one single note you pick up: seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. And how do you do that? Why must you do that? Those are perfectly reasonable things to ask yourself as you start the game. But the loose definition of this goal is the perfect way to spearhead your progression and subsequently your investment in the story. You aren't tied down by a concrete thing that would leave you questioning why you're often straying off the path. It is a malleable goal that is slowly fleshed out through your exploration and your progression through the world. The simple phrase that is established as your main goal is all that is needed to help guide you through the bizarre world of Yharnam. is the persistent reminder that hangs over your head that there are secrets hidden deep within the city that you need to uncover. I feel it is important to acknowledge that this style of storytelling doesn't work for everyone, and many players and as such audiences don't want to piece together things for themselves. I mean, they don't like not having all the answers, and that's perfectly reasonable. And it is just personal taste for me, I suppose, but for me, the FromSoftware style of storytelling is at its best in Dark Souls, and just doesn't quite land as well in Elden Ring for me. I mean, not saying Elden Ring has a bad story by any means, I just think the emphasis on mystery feels less apparent to me. And that's also due to the open world game design too, so we're not going to dwell on it anymore. But similar to how FromSoftware's games can deliver a story through putting together a puzzle of sorts, films can achieve that same effect by utilising clever editing and having tight direction to give the audience the necessary pieces they need in order to understand what they're watching. There are countless films that look to rely on telling its narrative on a visual level through the simplest exchanges of dialogues as opposed to exposition dumping and over-explaining itself to an audience. For me, there's nothing worse a film could do than to just talk down to you and treat you like you're dumb. I'm going to sound like a goddamn record here when I say that You Will Never Really Hear is a great example of effective storytelling that relies on showing the audience necessary information on a visual level rather than just telling you everything. I mean, I won't touch on it anymore because I've got a whole video that you can check out where I talk about You Will Never Really Hear. But films like No Country for Old Men or Under the Skin are also great examples of allowing the audience to learn details about the story through effective composition, editing, and thoughtful structure. They don't look to over-explain themselves, they let audiences read between the lines. Shout out to David Lynch as well and his entire filmography. I know that for a lot of people, David Lynch's filmography is not their cup of tea, and that's perfectly fine. But I will always admire, respect, and love his approach to filmmaking, and how his approach to storytelling is all about your interpretation, no matter how outlandish or ridiculous it may be, could be valid. I do think that filmmakers and writers can look for inspiration from the Souls games in regards to how they construct a narrative. I think there is a whole host of opportunities for exploring and experimenting with subtle forms of storytelling that gives the audiences the chance to piece together their own interpretation of events. Sure, you don't want to risk alienating your audience and losing their interest due to them simply not understanding what has happened. Oh, okay, my cat's meowing at me. DJ. There's no room over here, bud. There's no room, I'm afraid. Sorry. Sure, you don't want to risk alienating your audience and losing their interest due to them simply not understanding what is happening. But I think there's plenty of space to explore unique methods of storytelling that doesn't rely on the most basic level of explaining things through lengthy exposition dumps or narration. Narration can be done well, for sure. But more often than not, I've seen it used in quite painfully uninspired and convoluted ways. The culprits know who they are. Audiences are smart and savvy, and they can interpret and put together a story as they are experiencing it. You just got to trust that they'll get what you're saying. FromSoftware's Souls games managed to capture this incredibly unique tone and atmosphere, one that emphasises the player's traversal across a hostile realm, where their mere presence causes disruption and their actions have consequences on a sometimes cosmic scale. The games have this matter-of-fact tone where even the weirdest of visuals and images feel naturally integrated, where the music intermittently adds cinematic tension amongst the long periods of just eerie, total silence. The Dark Souls games especially do a phenomenal job at creating a distinctly oppressive but alluring atmosphere that just wraps you up and sucks you down into a rabbit hole of mysteries and curiosities. Lordran has multiple distinct areas that are all bound together in a manner that makes them feel tangible and real as the player navigates them, only to be brought back to the familiar safety of Firelink Shrine. It does such a good job at creating this feeling of connectivity that breathes life into the world and enhances the player's broader understanding of how everything operates. While the setting of Dark Souls 2, Drangleic, certainly lacks some of the more seamless connectivity of the first game, it more than makes up for it through the sheer grandness of its presentation. I mean, there's nothing more profoundly rapturing than your first time entering the sunken world of Hyde's Tower of Flame, or finally setting foot onto Drangleic Castle itself. Don't get me started on the ethereal beauty and majesty of Eliam Lois. I've also got to give some love to Dark Souls 3 and the Kingdom of Lothric. I mean, despite it being incredibly linear compared to the other previous games, sometimes to its detriment, There's no denying the level of detail and attention put into the environment, which lends perfectly to our interpretation of the history and the story. Bloodborne's Yana manages to create this incredible sense of horror through its disturbing werewolf-ridden streets set to the backdrop of a moody Gothic architecture, and Sekiro feels quietly immersive through the simplicity and beauty of its more natural, historically driven, ancient Japanese setting. And then there's the lands between from Elden Ring, which just shatters all sense of awe and wonder through its scale, with the impressively gargantuan Erdtree towering over everything, adding to this feeling of adventure. Each of these games mentioned have such unique settings that feel so perfectly presented and immersive to the players, and another important aspect of what makes them work so well is how they are fleshed out through the finest details that are all unearthed through your traversal of the environments. Your immersion is only further enhanced through picking up items and reading into the details of how that item links to the larger aspects of the world. For instance, you may pick up Pontiff's Left Eye Ring, where the item description will detail how a being called Pontiff Sullivan gave these rings away as a way of transforming knights into malformed beasts. We can already piece together what kind of person Sullivan is before we've even met him. He is so willing to corrupt and transform his own knights, but we can also gauge that he is probably smart and tactical in how he does this, as the item description details how he only gave these rings to the knights that were venturing off to other lands, suggesting he is aware of how volatile the rings can be in its corruption, and how he is willing to allow that volatile nature to fester far away while he remains in the safety of his own abode. This method of expanding upon the world does oftentimes rely heavily on expositional elements, sure, but what makes it work so well is that it never forces this upon the player. It is instead scattered about the world to be discovered. Furthermore, the cryptic way the item descriptions are written invites the player to seek out similar items or weapons or armor that perhaps may be linked to that item through its lore. It's like having all these tiny little jigsaw pieces that you gradually put together over time, eventually revealing key insights into the world you're exploring. It's all about player agency and involvement. There's no long cinematics or endless documents of information to scroll through. Your progression and understanding is only limited by your curiosity. I think elements of this method of background storytelling could be applied to filmmaking to a similar effect, utilising the environment and small details to expand upon an audience's understanding of the wider world. Both Blade Runner films is the obvious go-to example for me of how this works effectively, as the effort put into the production design just further establishes what a tangible and believable world it is. You feel further immersed into the story because the stunning lighting, smatterings of scrappy, dirty, crowded streets and enormous billboard signs help make the environment feel real. But there's also a benefit to having smaller details and moments to highlight particular aspects of your film's world. Similar to the item descriptions or where you find said items, a film can pull in from the macro to the micro to help tell the audience further information of what kind of place the story is set in is like. Mad Max Fury Road is remarkable in its attention to small details, particularly in regards to its visual storytelling and editing. But there's also the way the film illustrates the differences between the gangs and how they approach and construct their vehicles that helps further our immersion. The visual distinction between the various raiders' rusty, spike-covered vehicles and Furiosa's war rig tells us so much about their outlook on the world. We can learn about Furiosa's care and attention towards functionality through her war rig's various levels and defensive additions, while the scrappiness of the raiders conveys this feeling of chaos and unbridled aggression. They look upon the world as something to fight against rather than adapt to. I also feel there are plenty of animated films that do a great job at using environments to further convey information. I mean, certainly an animated film may find it easier to highlight details in the background to flesh out the world due to the painstaking handcrafted ability that is put into them. If you ever find yourself watching a series like Cowboy Bebop or just about any Studio Ghibli film, note how they will give attention to the environment the characters are in. There's plenty of time to breathe and tune into everything happening around the characters as much as there is attention put into the story itself. A film doesn't have the luxury to have all these incredibly immersive three-dimensional environments to explore like a video game does, but that shouldn't stop the background elements from helping to enhance the audience's investment with the film. The details that pass by the camera in a scene can go a long way to help immerse an audience member, just as much as editing to specific details that may not be relevant to the story at hand. If you have a film where the wider aspects of the world is important to making the story and characters feel grounded and real, then taking care and attention into building the intangibles is crucial to heightening an audience's belief in what they are watching. I absolutely love the games of FromSoftware and would happily rank the likes of Dark Souls and especially Sekiro as being my favourite games I've ever played. They've certainly got plenty of flaws to them, but they've just had such a big impact on my appreciation for storytelling, as well as helping develop and inspire my own creativity and approach to writing or making art. This video isn't necessarily about giving rules to follow for a writer or filmmaker. I mean, these are video games I've been talking about after all, and there are just so many aspects that could never translate effectively to the big screen. I guess if there's anything to take from this video, besides my obvious love for these games and perhaps exposing me as a glutton for being punished, I mean, you would probably also develop some sort of troubling infatuation for these games too, if you had Melania's beautiful metal boots kicking you up the arse. But I guess the main takeaway would be that there is plenty out there to look at and to explore for inspiration. When you're stuck in a creative rut, or perhaps your aspirations as a filmmaker or writer or actor or artist or whatever sort of creative ambition you've set on is slowing down, try looking for a healthy dose of imagination to help drive you forwards. There are so many fantastic things that people have made out there to look at and take note of, to feel inspired by and to aspire to, like a glimmering bonfire of hope to kindle in a dark, cold and frightening world. Thank you very much for watching. Consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and stay safe out there. Much love.